I'm Jeffrey Way, and today is the NetTuts.com screencast of the week. So today we're going to do another PSD to HTML tutorial since the last one was so popular. So for those of you that were following Web Design Week on PSD Tuts, you'll remember this article that Collis wrote called How a Simple Layout Can Be Mixed and Matched with Patterns, Photos, and Backgrounds. And he basically took a simple layout and with just changing a few things like background images and spacing and some highlighting and borders, he made just an amazing looking site out of a very simple layout. So what I decided to do is we are going to take this blue one right here, and we are going to take this and convert it to HTML. Okay, so he has a nice layout. We are going to take the PSD, slice it up, turn it into HTML and CSS, and make it ready for the web. Now, I should just give you a quick warning. This is my interpretation of how to do it. I'm sure Collis would have his own way, but this is the way I did it. So just a quick warning there. Okay, so let me show you what I ended up with. Here is what I ended up. Let me zoom out just a little bit since I'm on this tiny screen. Okay, this is more or less what I ended up with. So we have the transparency, we have the correct spacing that he set up. We have this nice radial gradient. We have this font that he used. So a lot of nice things. We have this nice texture background that he created. All right, so we are ready to get started. We're going to start from scratch, and let's get into it. I'm going to move over to Photoshop now. And this is very similar to something you would probably have for your own projects. This is Collis's Photoshop PSD. So if we come in, let's just take a look at a few important things. So what I'm going to do, since I have very little real estate, is I'm just going to close all this out for a moment. Okay, so first I recommend, if you haven't already, go and read that article because he has some great tips on things to look out for. So let's just take a quick review. I'm going to go to the color selector. Now these are things that Collis does that you don't even realize adds to the layout. So, excuse me, let's click right up here at the top of this main. You'll see it's 3A, 3A, 3A. Now if we come down, you can see it's actually changing to ECEC. So even though it's very subtle, he's got an extremely subtle gradient going for this main. So it could be very easy to just ignore that and do a white background because it's not noticeable. But at some level it is. So you need to be paying attention to those. Don't just set a white background for this main. You need to have a nice gradient. Next, he's got this nice heading font, which I believe is Rockwell. Yep. I don't have the font installed on this computer. Let's see what else. All right, here, let's take a look at this banner. If you can see here, we could just set a dark blue background and then add this image in. But if you zoom in a little bit, you'll see he added a nice little radial gradient here. So this was something I had to think about for a little bit about how to do it. And I determined, since this is not an image heavy layout, I could afford to maybe have a little bit higher an image size. So what I did is I simply just cropped out this entire banner right here. And I added this lower triangle. Now I could have added that after the fact, but I decided it would be best to save it as a 24-bit ping. That way I don't have to worry about adding a little triangle and positioning it perfectly. Okay, so that's how I got the first one. You're welcome to, if you want, just do it the quick way, is select your area, crop it out, and then save it. Now you want to make sure that you get rid of this lower area, and you can do that by finding the appropriate layers and turning them off. But we're not going to do that since I've already sliced everything up. I'm just going to go over everything with you. Okay, another area that I needed to create an image for is if we come to the sidebar, we have another one of these little triangles. Now there are many ways that we could have done it. I decided the best way would just be to take this entire sample right here, save it, and then when we create our sidebar in HTML, we will position it as a background image, and then we'll just position it at the top point, and that'll create that area. So once again, you would just crop that out or slice it out, save it, and then save it as sidebar. Okay, what else? Now, for this heading, we could have used something like Cipher. Or we could have just used, one of the normal fonts, and either method would be fine. Just to keep it true to his original design, I actually sliced out this text so we could have the Rockwell text on the site, and you can just use image replacement. So once again, with your slicing tool or with the crop, just slice that out. You want to make sure that it doesn't have this blue background. So go into layers, find your dark blue background, unselect it so you have a transparent background. You crop it out, save it for the web, and save it as a 24-bit ping, and that'll preserve the transparency. And then also do the same for your logo. Okay, next. If you will notice your sidebar here and your navigation, they're got about, I'd say, 50 or 60% opacity. So you might think, well, I can just set, the background color of the navigation div to black and then bring the opacity down. Now you could do that, but it requires a bunch of hacks. I think there's about 5 different hacks you have to use to get opacity to show correctly on all the different browsers. So what I decided to do was to slice out, let me zoom in. I decided to just slice out just a little bit. So if we come up here, I just grabbed a portion, selected it like so, saved it for the web, cropped it out, and then saved it for the web, and once again saved it as a 24-bit ping. And then in order to get the older browsers to display the transparency, we're just going to use a small JavaScript file called unit-pingfix, and that will take care of that. That way we don't have to worry about our CSS not validating and adding all this extra code. And other than that, the primary things to focus on and the primary things that make this layout as functional and nice looking as it is the spacing. Look at all of this spacing that Collis has added here. And this is, I think, in my opinion, what he's most talented at, is the spacing. Everywhere you look, there's just incredible amounts of spacing, and that's what makes it so easy on the eyes. And then also the last thing you need to get, of course, is this background. And once again, just select a nice little square area, save it for the web, and then we will just repeat that. Okay, that should take care of it. And then also, kind of his trademark is these nice little borders at the top. If we look at the top of our banner, we have this dark blue, but then he adds a top border of just a lighter blue, and it's amazing how much that really does. It's really incredible, actually, how much that can make a layout more deep and add a bit more depth. But we will add that little border using CSS. So all you need to crop out for the banner is just the area below it. All right, and that takes care of the PSD. I know I didn't do it step by step, and it's because I'm trying to keep this so it's not an hour and a half long again. But if you do need help with that, go back to the first PSD to XHTML, and that gives step-by-step instructions, and I will link to that on this article. So the next step is I've cropped everything out. I've saved them as images. Let's take a look at what I have. Once again, here's my banner background. We have our background for the website. We have our navigation background. Remember the triangle that I told you about? That's the triangle for the sidebar. And our logo. Very simple stuff. The primary background color, that was that main section with the very subtle white gradient. And all I did there, just to be as pragmatic as possible, is I just selected a small area like so. All right, sliced it out or cropped it out and then saved it for the web. And then we will just repeat that horizontally. All right, let's go in. My code editor of the week I'm using is Aptana. It's going pretty well. I think to some extent it's a little bloated. For those of you guys that have been watching, I've been using a different code editor every other week. And so this week's Aptana, I'm liking it. I'll give you a little more info after I've had more time to use it. All right, so we have a blank index.html page. I'm going to refresh this, and this is going to include those images that we just sliced out. All right, so let's get right into it. Within the body tag, I'm going to create the content. So I'm going to wrap everything within a div with an ID of container. And let's get started with the header. So I'm going to do div ID equals header. And I'm going to start out with that heading, your logo. Okay, close that out. And then next, if we come back to our layout, you'll remember we have this little area right here using a single layout to create several different looks. And this is what Collis did in his original design. So let's just copy that and let's paste it into our solution. And I'm going to use a small tag for that. Okay. That should do it for our header. So let's close that out. Okay. And next, let's do our navigation section. So the nav is this little area right here at the top, Home, About, Services, Contact. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to place that in an unordered list. So we'll do ul id equals nav. And within the nav, we'll do a few list items. And we're only going to do, as per usual, just the home page of this. So I'm just going to have them linked to nowhere. And the first one will be home. Copy all this. And we'll do 4 total. So we have home, about, services, and contact, I believe. Contact us. Okay, next let's work on the actual banner. And I'm calling it banner because maybe in an actual project, it would be some pretty picture of a lady. But the banner is referring to this about dark blue background. So let's come back and I'm going to do div id equals banner. And let's label that properly. Okay, and I'm going to do the heading about. We will use image replacement to use that Rockwell font. Sorry, my computer's moving a little bit slow. I've got a lot of programs running. Okay, and we need to paste in some text. So let's go back, and I'm just going to copy and paste this. Come back to Aptana and paste it in. There we go. All right, what else? Let's see. Actually, that'll be good for the banner. Everything else we will accomplish with background images and image replacement. So now let's focus on this main section that contains the sidebar and the primary content area. So I'm going to wrap everything here within a div with an ID of main. So let's do that right now. Let's do div ID equals main. Okay. And we'll start with the sidebar. I'm just going to call it secondary rather than sidebar because you never know, it may not be the sidebar after somebody plays with it. So this way it stays a little more easy to work with. Okay, and I'm going to put an unordered list, and this will contain it's kind of the sub-navigation. So once again, let's just do an anchor tag that links nowhere. And it's going to be about us. Now you might be wondering why I didn't just make the secondary an unordered list rather than using a div and then an unordered list within it. And that's a very good point. And the reason I did that is because maybe when it's customized, the user is going to add more than just navigation. Maybe they're going to add, sponsors section or, Flickr section. And in that case, you would need to have a wrapping div. So that's why I did it this way. Let's see, we have how we work. What else? Testimonials. And finally, contact support. Okay. So that takes care of the secondary section. Now let's work on the primary section. So I'm going to do another div id equals primary. Label it end primary. And let's use a heading level 2 tag for that, and that's going to be called how we work. And now we're going to paste in some of this gibberish text. So I'm just going to copy that once again, come back to Aptana and paste it in. Okay. Let's come back and let me just do a little bit of cleanup real quick. You're welcome to fast forward, 15 seconds or so. Okay, I think that's all of them. Let me see if I missed anything. There's one more. And I'm just not used to this editor, so I'm sure maybe there's a quicker way to auto format. Let me see if I right click format. Control-Shift-F. Okay, good. That works. So let me make sure there was 4 paragraphs. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, good. So that takes care of our main content section. The final thing, and actually, you know what? I think that's it. I don't think Css used a footer. No. So that's our layout. We did our header, and then our navigation section, then our banner, then our main div. We had our secondary content, which had the secondary navigation, and we had the primary content. So let's go ahead and view this in the browser and see what we end up with. So I'll hit run and come back to Firefox, and this is what we end up with, a nice naked layout. So we are going to take this whole thing and turn it into, take this whole thing and turn it into what Css created for us. Okay, let's get into it. Let's come back to Aptana, and now let's create a new CSS file. All right, so I'm going to create a new folder, and we'll call this CSS appropriately. And let's add a new CSS file, and I'm going to call this styles.css. Okay, and then finally we just need to link to it in the head portion. So let's quickly give this a title. We'll call it design by Css. All right, and let's link to it. So we're going to do link href equals css/styles.css, and rel is Stylesheet. All right, let's come back to Firefox, and we can get started writing some CSS. Let's refresh the page. I'm going to hit Control-Shift-E to edit my web page using the Web Developer toolbar. If you don't have that, just Google it and you can download it. I highly recommend it. I use it on most of these screencasts. Okay, first step, body. Let's do a few things. Because we're using a centered layout, to compensate somewhat for really old browsers, I'm going to set the text align to center on the body element, and that will make sure that the container div is centered on the page, because on those older browsers, margin auto doesn't always function the way you think it might. Font family, I believe Css used Helvetica, and backup will be Arial, and then just a sans serif. Font size, I'm going to set to 100%. Next, let's style all anchor tags. We obviously don't want that underline, so let's do text decoration equals none. And I'm going to set the color to white. But you know what? We'll come back to that, because right now we won't be able to see it, so we'll come back and remove that later. And just to create just a simple underline when the user hovers over the anchor tag. So we'll do text decoration underline. Okay, and then finally, we need to give the user some feedback to let them know which page they're actually on. And I'm going to do that by applying a class of selected to the anchor tag of the page that's on. So for instance, if we are on the testimonials page, I'm going to add a class of selected to that anchor tag. So I'm going to do a selected. Now we haven't added that into our HTML just yet. We'll do that shortly. So you won't see anything different yet. And we'll just set the font weight to bold. Simple enough. Okay, let's style all paragraph tags. We will do the color. Let me check my notes. We have 43433F, and that's just a light grayish black color, so it's not so extreme. And I'm going to set the line height to 21 pixels. Now, I literally did that by going into Photoshop and measuring the line height and then using that. So with Css designs, it's very important that you get as close to possible as far as the spacing and the line height. That's very important. That's what makes the entire design. So I made sure I tried to match that as best as I could. Okay, let's do the heading 2. If you remember, the only thing that's a heading 2 is this how we work section. And I'm just going to set that color to a little bit lighter again, 363E4A. Okay, and that just brings it down ever so slightly. And I'm going to set the font size to 30 pixels, which is what Css had it set in Photoshop. All right, let's do some more resetting. I'm going to set, for all list items, I'm going to set the list style to none. Okay, let's see what else. Whoops, sorry about that. There we go, that gets rid of the bullets. And now let's work on our container div. If you remember, the container div is the wrap. It wraps our entire website. So I'm going to set margin to auto to center it on the page. But first, we need to set a width. And he set a width, I believe, of 921 pixels. There we go. And if you see, if I set just a random background color for now, you'll see that show up. Okay, let me zoom out. And there's the frame for our layout. But we don't want a background color, so let's get rid of that. And I'm going to align the text back to the left because we centered it in the body element. So text align left. Okay, let's continue on. Now let's work on the header. And if you remember, the header contains the logo and the using a simple layout to create several different looks. So all I'm going to do for that right now is set position to relative. And that's because I'm going to have to, unfortunately, absolutely position this using a single layout. And I'll tell you why. It's a little bit of a drag. I wouldn't want to do it, and it's not the best thing we could do, but because of the image replacement, I had to. So let's do header H1. And I'm going to use image replacement. So we will do set the color. Actually, I don't need to set the color at all. I'm going to do text indent to negative 9,999 pixels, and that will shift it off the page. And then we're going to add a background image. And the background is going to be URL images / your logo heading.png. And I only want it to show up once, so no repeat. Okay, and the reason you're not seeing that is because that is a white image. So for instance, if I set a background color of red, it'll show up. I think. Yeah, there it shows. So let's go ahead and take care of that right now. Oh, by the way, this your logo heading, if you remember when I said in Photoshop, I just cropped out that title, saved it, I saved it as your logo heading. So now we're just adding it on. So let's go ahead and work on some of our backgrounds real quick. I'm going to zoom out again. And above the body element, I'm going to add HTML, and we're going to add that texture background. So let's do background is URL images / bg.jpg. Okay, now you can see, if I zoom in real close, you can see this is that texture background that Css was using. All right, let's zoom out. So we're slowly but surely getting to where we want to be. The next thing that I want to work on is this small tag that using a single layout to create several different looks. So let's come back, and after the header H1, let's do another one called header small. And I'm going to set a color of A3, A3, A3. And let's click off, and that's going to give it a nice gray color. And I'm going to absolutely position it. And let me go ahead and write out this code, and I'll explain why. Font size, I'm going to do 14 pixels. And the top, I'm going to set it to 0.63 ems from the top. There we go. And from the left, and remember, this is why I set the header position to relative. That way I created a new positioning context. Otherwise, for instance, if I remove this, it's going to be placed in reference to the window. So if I adjust this, it'll come with us. See? Like so. Okay? So let's come back and add our positioning back to the header. And I'm going to set the left to 203 pixels. And that pushes it over. Okay, and the reason I did that is because I could normally just add the small tag within my heading 1 tag, which is what I would normally do. And then maybe I would set the position to relative and shift it up a few pixels to get it vertically centered. However, I can't do that because I set the text indent of the heading tag to negative 9,000 pixels. So that would have shifted the small tag off as well. So I had to compensate, and there's probably a better way, but just doing this quickly, I used absolute positioning. But yeah, if your logo is a little bit longer, you're going to have to go in here and change that as well. So that's one feature that you could probably work on a few extra minutes and get a better setup. Okay, now let's work on our navigation. So I'm going to do nav, and I'm going to set a background color. Actually, not a background, and background image, and it's going to be images/navbg.png. And I'm going to repeat it along the x-axis. Now, if you remember, all this is just a black, just a little 5 pixel by 40 pixel filled with black, and then the opacity is brought down to about 50 or 60%. And I'm going to set the overflow to hidden, and I'm going to set the height to 57 pixels. Give it a specific height, and I'm going to display as block. Oh, whoops, that's not right. Sorry, I'm reading from my notes, and as I was reading that, I'm thinking, why did I do that? We do height is 57 pixels, and then the margin is 0 on the top, 0 on the right, 6 on the bottom, and 0 on the left. And let's also add a bit of padding. 0 on the top, 0 on the right, 0 on the bottom, 31 pixels on the left. Okay, and that just gives a little bit of spacing for the elements. Okay, let's style the list items now. I'm going to float each list item to the left. That way we get that horizontal display like you see here. And I'm going to set the line height to 57 pixels as well. Now, when you have an element, a parent element at 57 pixels, if we also set the line height, whoops, I have a typo. If I set the line height of one of the children equal to the height of the parent element, it'll essentially vertically center the text on the page like you can see here. So that's a nice little tip. Now let's style the anchor tags. So nav lia, and we're going to set a border right of 1 pix dotted and kind of a whitish color, AAB391. Next, let's do some more padding, and I'll do 0 on the top and 1 em on the right and left. I'm going to set display to block, or maybe not, I'm not sure about that. We may come back to that. And let's set the color of the text to white. Okay? Next, we need to, let me gather my thoughts. I want this anchor tag to line up perfectly with this sub navigation. If you can see here, it's shifted to the right somewhat. And that's because we've added some padding to each list item. So I want to make sure that there's nothing shifting this first anchor tag over. And the way I'm going to do that is by doing nav lia, and I'm going to create a class of first that we'll add to our HTML shortly. And I'm just going to set the padding left to 0. And that will remove it. But you're not going to see any difference yet because I haven't added that to our HTML. But just keep that in mind as we move along. Okay, next we're going to work on the banner. That's that big, pretty dark blue with the blue radial gradient. And the height of that is 243 pixels. I'm just going to hard code that in. It's okay. And we're going to set the border top. And this is going to be that light blue. Remember I told you that Css added that nice border. to create the depth, and that's 1 pix solid, and that light blue is 4D688D. 4D688D, yep. And you can see there it's been added. So let's add our background, and you remember I just cropped out that entire image, and that's images / I saved it as banner bg.png. And I do want it to repeat, actually I'm sorry, I don't want it to repeat, and let's just make sure it's in the top left corner, which is somewhat redundant. And now we have this nice section. All right, and remember we saved it as a PNG, and that's what's giving us this transparency. But in IE6 it's not going to show properly, and you're going to see this nasty gray background. So we'll end up having to add some JavaScript to fix that, but don't worry, it's a 2-minute fix. Okay, I'm going to set the position to relative to create a new positioning context, and I'm going to set the z-index to 2. I'll explain why later. It's not going to become clear just yet. And let's also set a margin bottom just to shift everything down to bring everything up of -2.8 ems. And that's going to pull up the main content section. Okay, let's style the about tag, which is right here, this black about, and we are going to use image replacement again. So the margin left, let's move it over. And remember, this is pixel perfect precision. I just measured in Photoshop to see exactly what Collis had done. So the margin left is 247 pixels. I'm going to set a margin right of 226 pixels. The color is going to be EC, which really isn't necessary because we're going to be moving it off the page. But even if the user has CSS, well, really, come to think of it, there's really no reason to add that color because we're moving it away. And if CSS is disabled, they won't see that color anyways. Yeah, so I'm just going to get rid of that entirely. And let's see, what else? Okay, also I'm going to get rid of this margin right because that'll be for the paragraph. I don't need to worry about it being that wide. So let's create another one, banner P, and this will move all of the paragraph information from the right. So if I move over, you can see now it's brought it over. So let's go back to our heading 1 tag, and let's set a margin bottom of 0 pixels because by default heading tags have some top and bottom margin. And I'm going to add some margin top and declare it at 46 pixels. So if you want, you can rewrite this as one style to save some space. And you can see here I've lined up the top edge of our heading perfectly with this dotted line, and that's important. All right. Let's set text indent to -9,999 pixels again because we're using image replacement. And I'm going to set the background to URL images / about heading, which is how I saved that transparent pink. And no repeat. Okay, and that brings it in just nicely. But just to be sure that all browsers display all of it, I'm going to specifically state the width and height. And the width of that image is 134 and the height is 34. Because maybe, I believe on Safari, some of this image can be clipped off. Okay, so that looks good for a heading tag. Let's go back to our paragraph tag again now. And I need to, as well, shift the margin about 247 pixels as well. And that lines it up perfectly with our heading. And I'm going to set the color to EC. Okay, that's kind of a nice whitish gray. And the font size will be 18 pixels. And I'm going to just set a little bit of a margin top of 0.8 ems. There we go. Looks pretty good. So now that takes care of our banner. If I zoom out a little bit more, you can see we are getting this layout quite nicely, and it's really not that tough. The main thing we're focusing on are these background images and lining everything up perfectly. All right, so now let's work on our main, which houses the main content and the navigation. So let's do main, which is the wrapping div, create a new positioning context. Let's deselect all that text. And position is relative, and the background is URL images / main bg.ping. And I'm going to repeat this repeat along the y-axis. Okay, so to explain to you what this main BG is it is the full width of this site, so that's 920 pixels by about 10 pixels. And I simply just grabbed this whole section right here, cropped off a small section and saved it, and then I tiled it vertically. And that's going to, it was just a quick way of setting up the background for the main content. And I'm going to add some padding at the bottom just to give it some space away from the text, and that'll be 4 ems. And once again, this is how Carlos set it up. So he added lots of spacing, things I wouldn't necessarily think of. He focuses on, and that's what makes him so talented. Okay, let's work on the secondary div. That's the sidebar, if you remember. And I'm going to float it to the left, obviously. The width is going to be 200 pixels wide. And what else? Let's set a padding on the top of 2 ems. And the background is, remember, we need to add that second triangle. So I saved that, and we're going to position it absolutely at the top of this div. So the background is going to be images/secondary triangle is how I called it. .jpg. No repeat. And I want it about -1 pixels from the left and 0. To be honest, I don't know why I had to shift it -1 pixels, but for some reason it was overflowing. So probably when I saved it, it came up just a little bit. And there you go. That's what we end up with. If you can see right there. So we get that nice triangle layout. Okay, let's zoom back out. And we've got so much of our layout now. Let's just work on it a bit more and get it complete. Let's work on each list item now, because obviously we don't want that blue. So secondary, LI. We're going to set the font weight of these list items to bold. And I'm going to add just a border at the bottom of 1 pix dashed. And it's going to be 343434. There we go. And let's create some padding to give them some space. 15 on the top, 0 on the right, 11 on the bottom, and 0 on the left. There we go. And you can see here, once again, this is lining up with the navigation. And finally, let's set margin right of 30 pixels. Okay. What else? I should also style the unordered list as well, wrapping these navigations. Secondary unordered list. And I'm going to set padding on the left of 31 pixels. And that's even lining it up even more by setting the left 31 pixels, because it was shifting it over more because of the default browser stylings. And let's add just a slight top margin. Okay, so that takes care of our secondary. I need to change the color of that text, but we'll do that later. Let's do our primary content section. Now I'm going to come back to Aptana, and I labeled this main section primary. So let's come back. We have primary, and we will set a margin left of 200 pixels. Now if you see here, if I remove that, you can see that the text is overflowing into the secondary content, and that's because it was floated to the left. So we need to make sure that we set a margin left equal to or more than the width of the sidebar or the secondary div. So we'll do margin left is 200 pixels, and I'm also going to set a background of URL images/primary bg.jpg repeat x. And this is that subtle white to complete white gradient that I showed you about at the very beginning. And let me make sure I add a background color to that as well. And that background is E6, E6, E6. And that's equal to the final color at the very bottom of the image. That way, when we repeat it at the bottom, it'll stay. But I am getting this texture. Where is that coming from? To be honest, I'm not sure. I'm assuming I made a mistake. So for the time being, let's just comment that out, and we'll come back later to fix it because it's not that big of a deal. All right, let's style that how we work label. Heading 2, let's do padding, 46 pixels on the top, 0 on the right, 15 pixels on the bottom, and 0 on the left. And I'm also going to add a margin left to 46 pixels. And that gets that nice spacing. And once again, I measured that accurately on Css's design. And I could set a margin right, which is what I did in my original work. I don't know exactly why I did that, so you might be able to remove. May remove. And this is, sometimes you come back to your work and you think to yourself, why did I do that? And I might have been working on, a different idea. But I'm not going to remove it because it might have been needed, so I'm just going to comment that out, and I'll come back to it after we've completed the project. Let's see what else. I need to set a border bottom because he had a nice just striped bottom. So we'll do border bottom. It's 2 pics dotted, and it's AAB391 was the color that I picked up. And there it is, that nice subtle border. And finally, let's just style our paragraph tag, and I think we're done. Primary P, and padding left is going to be the same as for the heading 2. If I can get organized, padding left is 46 pixels. And I'm going to set padding right as well to shift it away from the edge. Let me zoom out. Maybe a little bit more. I'm going to add some padding right to shift it away from over here as well. So padding right, I've set to 57 pixels. Once again, based on Css's design. Okay, I'm going to copy all of this, paste it back into my solution, into my styles.css file. Save that. Let's come back to Firefox. Refresh the page. That's what we originally had. I'm going to come back and let's look over it one last time. So I'm going to close this out as much as I can and zoom out a little bit. And you can see here, this is pretty much exactly the way Css did his original, although I do need to fix that secondary section. So let's go and find the anchor tag, color white. And you know what? Even from the beginning of this screencast, I can't remember why I commented that out. Oh, that's right, because we had a white background. So we're going to uncomment that, and that'll take care of that ugly blue. Okay, copy that again, come back to Aptana, paste it. Now, one thing I'm going to do real quick is I need to move my style sheet out of my CSS folder because of the way I access to the images. I would need to go back in here and change images to .. /images. But just to keep it simple, I'm going to move it out and come back into my index.html file and modify the CSS. But then when I deploy it, I would go and fix that. But I'm a little lazy and I'm trying to get this done because we're at 45 minutes. So let's refresh the page. And so there we go. There is our layout. So you can see we have, at least I hope you can see in this screencast if you zoom in, we have this nice transparency that we can see through to the background. Everything is lining up appropriately. So the navigations are, and the heading are all lining up. And it's just nice spacing. We have this nice border. The only other things we need to do at this point are compensate for IE6 and just see if there's any problems with the other browsers. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to come in and open IE tester. And let me resize this for the window. And I'll create a new tab and we're going to view our site in IE7 and then we'll go back to IE6. And if you guys are anything like me, I put IE6 off to the very end because I cringe, because depending on how your site looks in IE6 determines whether you're going to have another hour of work or another 5 minutes of work. So I just hate doing it. It makes me so nauseated. All right, so let's look at an IE7. The only thing I see here is, you see the secondary, it's a little too close to that triangle. So we're probably, maybe if I had used a full reset file at the beginning, that would compensate for it, because I am assuming it's some kind of browser styling that's shifting that up. But other than that, I can't see the whole thing on this small screen, but other than that, it looks pretty good. So let's also, although I am getting this spacing here, but depending on where I move the mouse, it goes up and down. That might be a discrepancy with IE Tester, so I will also check that on the actual version of IE7. Let's go into IE6 now, though. Either way, that's not a big deal. And let's see what we end up with in this browser. Ah, yuck. So you can immediately see all these problems. Now, luckily, we can fix this very quickly. So if you're kind of new to web development and you're thinking, what the heck are all these, what's all this gray? And that is how the transparency is interpreted by IE6. If it comes across transparency, it just kind of turns it into a nasty light grayish, which is everything you see here. And then also you can see, where is our navigation completely? Our secondary navigation, it's gone. Hopefully, luckily, we can kind of fix this pretty quickly. So the first thing that I want you to do, if you haven't already, is do a Google search for unit ping fix. And I think this is just kind of the quickest way, and what it literally does is the JavaScript manually adds the Internet Explorer CSS styling to make the opacity show up. So it's just kind of a nice way your CSS still validates, but you move it all to a JavaScript file. So you're going to click this download now file, and that's going to download the unit ping. So let's click it, and I'll click Save File. All right, that's done downloading. So now I'm just going to extract that real quick and bring it into my solution, and you should do the same. So I'm going to pause for just a moment. Okay, so I've gone and extracted that, and this is what it gives me, a unit ping fix folder, and it's going to give me a JavaScript file and a clear.gif. So I'm going to drag those into my solution. Take that, drag it in. I'm going to make sure clear.gif is in my images folder. Yes, it's saying it already exists because I used it previously. And just to keep things clean, let's create a new folder called JS and store our unit ping fix JavaScript file within there. So grab that and drag it into JS. And let's make a reference to it in our main page. So script type equals text / JavaScript. And source equals JS / unit ping fix. Okay, so that should take care of it. So pretty much adding this in, it's going to find all pings and add that transparency. So let's come back to IE and see if I did anything wrong. So we'll go back to IE Tester. Let's do a complete refresh. Okay, and you can see there it's compensated for us. Now, there are a few things I had to change. Now, if you remember, when I added this background image, I had it as bg.jpg. Now you might be thinking to yourself, why in heck would you save it as a JPEG? It's really would be best and smallest as a ping. Well, it does have a small bug where if applied to background images that are ping, it's going to stretch them out. So if you ever use this file and you see a background image that's stretched out to like 800 pixels, that's why. So sometimes the easiest fix is just move it over to a JPEG, and it might be a K or two bigger, but big whoop. Okay, so the only other things we see here is we need to compensate for this spacing that's been screwed up a little bit. And other than that, it should be just fine. So let's create a new CSS file. New CSS, and I'm going to call it ie.css. Okay, and within ie.css, I'm just going to add a few quick stylings. If you remember that main div, it was way too close to our banner, so I'm just going to add a margin top of 1.5 ems. And then also the secondary, container secondary. Let me go ahead and add this real quick. Ooh, to be honest, I'm not really liking this text editor. Okay, like what is this? Container mods binding. How did any of this happen? Okay, sorry about that. So container secondary, and we are going to set padding top to 3 ems. Okay, so let's come back to IE tester and I'll explain that a bit more. If you see here, this main div, it's too close to our banner. We need some spacing. And to be honest, I just haven't spent enough time to figure out exactly why. You might try using a full reset file. And I know some of you are against using conditional style sheets, but I really don't think it's a big deal at all. You know, I think it's a nice thing that we're even still compensating for IE6, so I have no problems adding a hack sheet. It's just not a big deal at all to me. So anyways, with the main div, we just added a bit of top margin to push it over. And then also on the sidebar, I added just some top padding to push this navigation down a little bit because it's too close to the top of that triangle. Let's refresh the page again. Whoa, whoops. We've added our IE style sheet, but we actually need to reference it. And we need to put a little more specificity on this ping fix as well, but we'll do that shortly. Don't worry, we're almost done. Thanks for watching. We will do if less than or equal to IE7, then we are going to link to our IE style sheet. So I'm just going to do link, paste that in, and change styles to css/ie.css. And I just need to close that out. So I believe that's end, if one word, like that. Maybe no exclamation point. Okay, I think that takes care of it. And the only other thing I want to check is we don't want to just by default import this JavaScript file. We only want to import it if the user is using IE6 or less. So let's do another one. If less than IE7, then import this script file and close that out. Okay, do a quick cleanup. Okay, so now we're saying if the user is accessing the site from IE6 or less, then import the JavaScript file. But we don't want to add all that extra information if it's not necessary. And then the second one says if they are using IE7 or less, then link this style sheet. Come back to Internet IE tester, refresh it. Okay, and that's added that extra bit of spacing, and the secondary has added that padding at the top, and that's given us this nice layout. So let's go back to Firefox and refresh it to get one final look at what we end up with. Nothing's going to change because we were only targeting IE. And if you look at this in all the browsers, it should look exactly the same. So that's been your screencast of the week, 53 minutes, but hopefully, especially if you're getting started, this will help you a great deal. And feel free, if you saw any mistakes I made, I'm not above judgment, so I'm learning from you just as much as you're learning from me. So also, if you guys have requests for future screencasts, I am more than happy to take a look at them, because it's hard to think of ideas, but hopefully you enjoyed this. And do me a favor, as I always say, the only payment I'll ever ask from any of you is maybe leave a comment if you enjoyed it, give it a dig or stumble upon or dzone, and if you haven't already, do me a quick favor and just subscribe to the RSS feed. And that's all I'll ever ask. Actually, one more thing. I am going to ask you one more thing. I am putting a lot of work into the ThemeForest blog. So if you visit blog.themeforest.net, we are updating the site. Let me zoom out. I update the site every day. We have some great guest articles, like 10 unique examples of RSS feed designs. And I'm also running a daily or every other day